It was a cold February evening in Calgary, Alberta, when we decided we didn't have enough vehicles. So we scoured the marketplace and Taylor decided to send a link to an X5. Of course, he was just trying to show me that it had a ton of mileage, and I said, oh, I want it, and we bought it. This is the cheapest X5 diesel in Canada, I'm sure of, because I checked. This blueberry beast here is a 2011 335 diesel with the M57 engine. Of course, being the cheapest one in Canada, it's gonna have some problems, and this one does. This one here ends up having 448,000 kilometers, I believe. So that's probably 280,000 miles wherever you guys are watching this from. And it decides it only wants to run on 5 cylinders. Now, why it's running on 5 cylinders, we're not sure. Of course, I sent the guy a message, said, hey, I want to buy it because, you know, I don't already have enough projects. I'm blaming you for this one. Yeah, I'm blaming him. Of course, this one having 450,000 kilometers, we ended up buying it from the original owner. They took good care of it. They didn't want to get rid of it, and subsequently ended up buying a 2012 version with no issues, but completely stock. So this one here is completely dirty, but it's been fully deleted. So we know it's not an emissions issue, and it does have a tune, but the transmission tune is stock. The goal for today is to find out if it genuinely needs a motor or not. Previous owner took it to a mechanic shop. They said, yeah, the injectors are fine. That being said, when you open the oil cap and you let it idle for a bit, it's usually a telltale sign if there's additional smoke, if it's gonna be a bottom end issue. So for this one, there really isn't any smoke, but when you bump it off idle, same thing, where you would expect if it had a bottom end issue, so being ring land, ring, hole in the piston from a stuck injector, nothing. So there's no additional smoke and it fires up without any issues. And on the drive home, it occasionally clears up. So I'm thinking maybe the motor is okay. We're gonna check a few things to see if we got a hell of a deal or if we're gonna have to pull another motor and fix it. We're gonna start with the top 4 things that I've confirmed with this. X5s, most BMWs in general, are very dependent on the quality and the voltage of the battery. The diesel is even more so reliant on proper voltage. So we're gonna do a condition check of the battery. Of course, the battery ended up going really low, so we had to boost it with a vehicle to get it into the garage. So we're gonna double check to see if there's any dead cells in it and the overall health of the battery. Second thing we're gonna do, when I asked the original owner the last time he changed the fuel filter, I got the 1,000-mile stare and the I don't know. These are meant to be changed every, I think, 20 to 30,000 miles, kilometers, whatever. And if it's not being changed, it's very possible that the fuel filter itself has collapsed. So we've got this Hengst filter that we're gonna be swapping in. So an issue with some of these is that the membrane or whatever, the cellulose inside, can collapse and cause a fuel issue. When we were driving it home, it felt as though it had, like it would clean up a bit, but you get a little bit harder on the throttle and it would start to shudder and shake violently. But as Taylor was following me home, driving this thing, there was no smoke. So we might be okay and the bottom end might be all right. Of course, lots of people, the mileage is gonna scare them, but for one of these, 450,000 kilometers from the original owner, who changed the oil every 10,000 kilometers, it's not gonna have chain issues and it's likely not gonna have rod bearing concerns. Beyond that, I tentatively did do a bit of a smoothness or a run check with the injectors. So we plugged in our, just a cell phone with Pro Tools and ended up checking to see the fuel injector enrichment, I think it was, per cylinder. Now, as you increase RPM, it's meant to go as close to 0 as possible, but injector 6 kept deviating. It's a bit of a concern because we may end up having a cylinder 6 issue. And of course, with these X5s, so most of these cowls end up breaking right along the seam. So you can see this one's separated here. Yeah, right there. So it's just separated and cracked. What ends up happening is water gets into this cowl and it pours onto the back of the engine, and of course under the engine cover, under the foam, and causes havoc with both the injector harness and the injectors. So past checking the injectors, the last thing that we're gonna attempt to do today, and hopefully I don't have to pull the intake manifold off, is checking the injector wiring harness. So they have a separate harness, 6 plugs, 1 for each injector, and it goes to the DME or the DDE, I think they call it on these. What they say is to pull each one, check resistance and continuity for each connector. It's very possible that if one injector is not getting a proper connection, it's simply not firing. And if it's intermittent, it could be a corrosion issue. Hopefully it ends up just being an injector, or potentially we need to repair the harness or purchase a new harness. I'm crossing my fingers that it's gonna be relatively simple. So stay tuned. If you have a similar issue, this video might end up helping you out, but first and foremost, I think we're gonna probably throw in a fuel filter. Well, we're gonna check the battery and then a fuel filter. It didn't install itself.
Oh, try again.
All right, we know this battery is gonna have to come out regardless, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna loosen it all up. Just a handful of 10 mils. Now this metal clip is kind of a pain. You have to reach your hand in there to pick it out on both sides. I picked up one of these cheap battery scanners just off good old Amazon. Now this one here, it works off the battery voltage. So if it turns on, it knows that the battery has at least some voltage. And on here, we're just gonna select battery. And from here, quick test. Now if you look at the top of the battery, what it's asking you is cold cranking amps. Top of the battery here, cold cranking amps is 850. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go back into this little scanner, 850, hit OK, it's testing. This is before charging, so it tells you to retest after charging. You can see the voltage is low, it's 994. 994 is not great. 850, right now it has 450 cold cranking amps. Resistance, I think that's okay, but currently the life is 25%. So for this, what we're gonna do is we're going to charge it fully, retest it. Initially, not great. So we're gonna throw it on a charger and see if we can bring it back to life. It does look pretty okay though, other than water. Fuel filter is gonna be on the driver's side under a few brackets. And by under a few brackets, I mean it's gonna be underneath the under tray skid plate kind of thing on the side. It's gonna be a little bit hard to visualize just because there's not a whole lot of room. So I'm gonna lift it up first and see if I can show you. When you take all the skid plates off, you'll see right where the transfer case is, it's gonna be right over here. So that's what we're looking at for the filter. This one is disgusting. So first and foremost, I'm hoping all the connections come off nice, and I'm hoping it doesn't fight me, but let's see. We got the filter out. Now, fighting with these was gonna be an absolute awful experience. So we just ended up cutting the hose on that end. I tried to pick the connector off, and of course it ended up breaking just the tip off. There's the little nipple portion here. So the fuel line, if we're looking towards the front of the vehicle, this one here routes underneath, and then the other fuel line goes right into here, and there's an electrical connection. This here is the heating element, but of course in BMW's infinite wisdom, they have the fuel line going straight through this as well. I don't think I was really rough with it. Usually I'm pretty careful with that, and it ended up breaking off right away. So it might end up being a good thing that that happened. With 450,000 kilometers, we want it to be plenty reliable. So we're gonna end up changing this one here. One of the reasons why I think this might be an original filter is because of this fantastic BMW logo right there. This is a stainless body and there's a bunch of built up corrosion. It's not gonna rust, but that's gonna take years to accumulate on the actual body of the filter. But Taylor, how much is a BMW filter, and why is it solidifying why we think that this is original?
It is $397.32 Canadian.
$397 for the original BMW filter from Malle. Almost $400. On Rock Auto, it's 50 bucks. And for the ones that I could get that were available, Hengst, and of course these are, I believe, made in Germany, 43 or $44 Canadian peso, and it's still a quality part. Now for people that go to the dealership and they're kind of suckers, I don't know what kind of markup they have in them. Love BMWs, but man, does that piss me off. So hopefully this isn't a whole lot, something that we're gonna wanna change regardless, just because it seems to be a bit brittle. And you never know if the element is even okay. In some models, you don't have this element with the connection, but being that the connector was heavily corroded, it's quite possible that this element had failed some time ago. And because we live in wonderful Canada, we want to rely on our vehicles starting in the middle of winter. Next up, what we're going to do, we're going to try diagnosing the engine harness and the injectors. So we're going to pull everything off the top, airbox, the sound deadening mat, the cover, and go from there. Okay, small update. I didn't feel like pulling the intake manifold off just yet. So what we're gonna do is we ended up color coding, or figuring out the color coding for each injector right to the connector back here. So we checked all the color codes for each injector and pinned them back to this connector that goes to the DDE. Now this is the only one that's twisted like this, so it made it relatively easy. So each twisted pair is going to be per injector. And what we ended up doing is, once we confirmed the color, we ended up writing down on this China box, I'm not sure what this is for, but looking at the connector from the top up, you'll see you have a row 2x4 and 1x4. Now, for here, this is each one. So we have red, white stripe, brown, white stripe, red, black stripe, brown, blue stripe, or I guess that's blue. The most important part is, per injector, you know which colors they are, so you can pin them and check the continuity properly. But up here for the connector, you have your pairs. So you have 1 and 1, 2 and 2, 3 and 3. Now the ones with the dots are the brown ones with the stripes. And I'm assuming that's gonna be ground, but at least now we can pin them to check continuity and resistance. Now there shouldn't be much of a resistance, including the engine harness. So we're gonna make sure each clip is connected to each injector properly, and we're gonna test the ohms. From what I understand is you wanna check it between like 20 and 30 degrees Celsius. Now whether that's Celsius or Fahrenheit, I'm not sure. But of course, because this is complicated and it took me a while to find the actual information, I'll be sure to provide you guys links in the bottom, in the description here. So go down there, you'll check to see exactly what forms that I referenced. And you'll be able to review exactly what I reviewed, and it'll go over the resistances. If I remember off the top of my head, the resistance you're going to be looking for per injector to make sure that electronically or in the body of the injector it's okay, is about 180 ohms. I'm not an electrical engineer. I think that's what it's going to be. But at the end of it, as long as they're within 10, from what I understand, it should be fine. Plan of attack for this one here is we're gonna end up using 2 needles. Now, the reason you're gonna end up using these 2 needles is because the injector harness right here, we've already confirmed continuity, but what we're actually gonna do now is check the resistance through the injector. Now, we did initially fight trying to get the connectors off of the injector, and because of the orientation of some of the hard lines, you can't actually get them out. So 3 of them you can kind of move to the side and it's really not a big deal. The other 3, because they're bent a little bit funny, you can see here like the odd numbers 1, 3, and 5 are bent a little bit weird. 2, 4, and 6 are straight. So of course the straight ones you're able to actually slip the connector out. So what we're gonna do following this diagram here, we're gonna pin each one of the connectors. So if you look over here, you'll see there's 2x4 on the left side here. And then on the right side, there's 1x4 and 1x4 here. So we're gonna start with checking 1. So again, the dot is gonna end up being the ground. I'm gonna pin 1. Now this should read roughly around 180, but let's take a peek. 181, and you gotta see where it stops. Okay, 181.6. It should be there. 181, 182. So 3 is gonna be a little bit tricky because they're both on the same connector. 181.6. Okay, this is 4, 182.1. Yeah, 181.8. So if we take a look at the box, you'll see the majority of them, 181, 182. So the resistance is okay. Next thing to try is run INPA for roughness checks to see if we can confirm which cylinder it was. I did run a check through Pro Tools. Now I can't remember exactly which one, but it did end up showing that there was an issue with cylinder 6. Something was a little bit strange with that one. So with Pro Tools, share of the current cylinder specific correlation quantity for cylinders. Now, as you end up revving it up, all of these values ended up going down. So -2 mg hub, 1.4. This one is 0.1. Now, cylinder 6 always stayed around 5.2, 5.3. So cylinder 6, whatever this value is, it's showing that it's either adding fuel or the pulse width or the duty cycle of the injector is widened. For now, we're gonna clean up. I'm gonna figure out exactly how to do the rest of it to get it up and running, a little bit more research, and we'll get right back to you. Oh, hey. So we're gonna end up checking the battery, and we've charged it with this questionable charger off Amazon, and we've let it cool. So to get it as accurate as we can for value, we let it cool down to room temp, and same thing, it's 850 cold cranking amps. So it should be set where it was, and drum roll, battery's okay. So state of charge, it's reading 94%, 12.59 volts, which is all right. Measured cold cranking amps, it shows 787, and life, SOH, can't remember what that means, 82.9. The battery's okay. We're gonna put this back in the vehicle, and I'm gonna show you what we are working with for the fuel heater thing. So as you can see, my brute force broke this one, which wasn't ideal, but it didn't take a whole lot of effort regardless. So if these are super fragile, they could easily break. Fortunately enough, we were able to find one locally at a scrapyard here. I'm gonna go throw it in. I don't need to show you how to throw it in. It's relatively straightforward. Because there's a little O-ring here, just make sure you lube it up before you put it in the end of the filter. So again, we're just gonna use this Hengst filter. That's a fraction of the cost of the original one, and this goes right in the back. So after I check it in, what we're gonna do is we're gonna run the roughness test to see if there's anything that we can further diagnose. I have a hard time believing that it's an engine issue, but of course, we're gonna fire up input, we're gonna check the roughness test, we're gonna do some additional diagnostics to see exactly what's going on and go from there. Stay tuned.
She thinks my tractor's sexy.
It's not a tractor. So I'm gonna show you guys what it sounds like. It seems like it's smoothing out a little bit, so maybe it's just a matter of air after the fuel filter was changed. So I'll put the mic near the exhaust and then near the intake or engine. A little bit of a miss. Sort of. Let's see. For the most part, it kind of sounds like a regular diesel. I'll rev it a little bit so you can take a listen. It's got that whistle, but sounds like it's got a big old cam. What Taylor's looking for is the smoothness. Was it smoothness or roughness test?
Smooth running.
Smooth running. And of course, what Taylor's using is the Insta. I don't know if it's Insta or Insta Plus. Ista. What did I say? Insta? Ista. We're using Ista.
It ain't the gram, Tony.
Shut up. Ista. We're using Ista for the smoothness operating test. And the AM radio keeps going on.
So cylinder 6, 5.3.
Already?
Yeah.
So cylinder 6 is 5.3, and the critical range is lower than negative 5.0 or above 4.0. So it's already critical. Wonder what it does if I bump the RPM.
She smooths right out.
Why did it smooth out? Never free rev a diesel, by the way, guys. It's really bad for the motor.
See, as it starts to smooth out, it goes within tolerance.
And then it starts to have a problem. Now this is a tip that you could use on multiple different vehicles to determine if it's a bottom end issue or if you have a potential issue. So you pull the oil cap and you see how there's steam? Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna raise the idle just a hair and I'm gonna show you. If this smokes worse, you likely have a ring or a ringland issue. Now for this, that clapping or slapping noise you're hearing is just the vacuum pump, so you don't need to worry about it. Second test with the oil cap, because it has these two provisions, just simply put it right on top and watch how it jiggles. If it tightens, the engine is building vacuum. So I'm going to show you again. If it tightens to the right, the engine's building vacuum. If it was pushing outwards, or if it was trying to push the actual cap off, then you end up having blow-by issue. For this one, it's vacuum and it's tightening, so we're just going to clip that shut. BMWs rely very heavily on proper vacuum, so of course now you hear it's dead silent.
Here, come here for a sec. It says replace fuel injectors at following cylinder, cylinder 6. It tells you what...
Oh, it's telling you what the problem is.
Yeah.
So it's an injector. It literally tells you a diagnosis for your issue.
And that's the corrections that I got as a max and a min.
Max and a min.
So cylinder 1 I would probably change. And cylinder 6.
Now because there's an injector issue, I don't want to run it for longer than we need. Can I shut it off?
Yeah, I just wanted to show that before it disappeared. Low washer fluid.
Low washer fluid.
We live in Canada, you can't do that.
We got a lemon. It has low washer fluid. But all the other lights are gone. I literally said, Taylor, the sad thing is we're getting good at this. And then Taylor responds with, we need lives. Now, nothing lasts forever. Eventually you're gonna need to replace certain things. But for this one here, it literally is telling us that cylinder 6 is critical. You need to be changing that injector, and then cylinder 1. So what we'll probably do is we're gonna look for 2 injectors, see if we can get them cleaned. At the same token, if we can find a diesel shop in town to either repair these, that might be an option. I don't know too much about that. So regardless, we're gonna have to pull the intake manifold, pull 6 injectors, and then we're gonna deal with it. Now, did we get a good deal? I think so. With a couple of little things, you can determine if it's a detrimental or a massive issue, or not so massive of an issue. When an injector fails, it's never a good thing, but fortunately this was caught early on. Now when the injector fails on these in particular, especially if they're run hard, you can quite literally melt a hole right through the top of the piston. But of course, I don't suspect that we're gonna have that issue simply because of the oil cap test, where it'll either loosen or tighten under vacuum, and it doesn't smoke, at least not excessively. It's a deleted diesel, it's gonna smoke a little bit of black, but that's the majority of it. I think we got a good deal. $3,000 for a running and driving X5 diesel. It drove here under its own power. It clears up at higher RPM, and it's not much of an issue. The previous owner dumped a bunch of money into it, so at this point we get to potentially reap those benefits. We're gonna source out 2 injectors. We're gonna swap them. At the same time, when we rip off the intake manifold, I'm gonna hot tank it, make sure it's all cleared of carbon, do the swirl flap delete just because I have a kit laying on the shelf, throw it together, go from there. So for the next video, feel free to stay tuned. And as always, like and subscribe. And one thing to mention is if you think I did something wrong, or if you have any tips, or if you encountered this issue, let me know in the comments. See you guys in the next one. Let's go! is wrong with you?
I don't know, you guys got more coffee?
What? All right, back to 2. That doesn't make sense. We're not mechanics. We are dumbasses. Dum 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 dum. Back to 4.
My heart rate flatlining.
My patience flatlining. This is cylinder 6 stance, and if you blew the injector and you blew the motor, this is the cylinder 6 stance. Get it? Because that's a piston hole in the. Forget it.